Shadow work is probably the most misused phrase in the entire self-development space right now. And that matters, because the real thing underneath the phrase is one of the most useful psychological frameworks ever developed. And most people engaging with it have never actually been told what it is. If you have seen it attached to a journaling prompt, or a video about healing your inner child, or a wellness account with a lot of moon imagery, that is not necessarily wrong, but it is incomplete. Today we are going to give you the full picture, where shadow work actually came from, what it means when understood correctly, and what it can do for you that almost nothing else can. The concept of the shadow comes from Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist who lived from 1875 to 1961. Jung spent his career studying the structure of the human psyche, not just the conscious mind that most of us identify with, but the vast and largely unmapped territory beneath it. He proposed that the psyche is not a single unified thing. It is a collection of structures, each with its own history, its own agenda, and its own way of making itself known. The ego is our conscious sense of self. It is who we think we are, how we narrate our own story, how we move through the world with a name and a set of beliefs about what we are like. The persona is the mask we wear in public, the version of ourselves that is socially adapted and presentable. It is not dishonest exactly, but it is selective. And everything that does not fit the persona has to go somewhere. That somewhere is the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the unconscious repository of everything the ego has rejected. Every quality, every impulse, every desire or emotion that did not fit the image we needed to project, or that our environment told us was unacceptable. It gets pushed out of conscious awareness, not destroyed, not resolved, just relocated into the dark. Here is where the popular understanding breaks down. Most people who encounter shadow work online assume the shadow is purely a collection of the worst things about them. The rage, the cruelty, the pettiness, the capacity for harm. Jung was explicit that this is not the whole picture. The shadow contains anything that has been disowned, regardless of whether that thing is objectively harmful or objectively good. For many people, the shadow holds ambition. Ambition that was shamed as selfishness. Sensitivity that was dismissed as weakness. Anger that was forbidden entirely. Desire that was labeled inappropriate. These qualities do not disappear when they are pushed underground. They go beneath the surface and begin driving behavior from below, often in ways the person cannot explain or predict. And then there is what Jung called the golden shadow. The positive qualities we have been told we are not allowed to claim. The gifts that were criticized or never reflected back to us. The strengths we were taught to call by other names. When you feel an intense, almost envious admiration for someone, when a person's confidence or creativity or boldness produces something closer to pain than appreciation in you, you may be recognizing a quality that belongs to you, that you have simply never felt permission to own. The shadow does not stay quietly in the dark. It makes itself known constantly, through 4 primary mechanisms. The first is projection. When something is too uncomfortable to acknowledge in ourselves, the psyche casts it outward. We see it clearly in other people while remaining blind to it in ourselves. Jung put it plainly: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The intensity of the reaction is the signal. A mild dislike tells us relatively little. A disproportionate, visceral, almost personal irritation. That is the shadow asking to be recognized. The second mechanism is the trigger. When an emotional response feels far larger than the situation warrants. When a small criticism devastates you. When a passing comment sends you into a spiral that lasts for hours. That disproportionality is information. Something older than today's interaction is responding. The present moment has activated a wound from a much earlier moment, and the shadow is trying to bring that earlier material into the light. The third mechanism is the complex. Jung described complexes as emotionally charged clusters in the personal unconscious, organized around a core wound or theme. When a complex is activated by a word or a tone or a situation, it can temporarily take over the ego entirely. You react in ways that do not feel like you. You say things you later cannot explain. You feel seized by something that has its own momentum. That is a complex speaking. And complexes are built largely from shadow material. The fourth mechanism is self-sabotage. When a shadow belief conflicts with a conscious goal, the shadow almost always wins, not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet, incremental undermining. The unconscious operating system overrides the conscious intention. When you repeatedly undermine your own success, when you push away good relationships, when you find yourself doing the exact opposite of what you consciously want, this is frequently the shadow expressing a competing need, a buried fear, or an old decision that says you are not allowed to have this. Shadow work is the practice of bringing the shadow into conscious awareness, of deliberately turning toward the material the ego has been managing by refusing to look at it. It is not a dramatic confrontation. It is not about performing your wounds in public. It is simply a sustained willingness to look. Jung called the larger process individuation, the lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness. Not perfection. Not the elimination of difficulty, but the gradual integration of every part of yourself into a conscious and functioning whole. The specific practices that shadow work involves are not mystical. They are available to anyone willing to pay close attention to their own experience. Projection work, trigger inquiry, dream attention, honest journaling about the parts of yourself you would rather not admit to. Each of these is a door into the same territory, the territory of what you have been carrying unconsciously, and what becomes available to you when you begin to carry it consciously instead. Shadow work is not therapy. This is important and worth saying clearly. Working with a licensed therapist is a structured clinical process with professional training and ethical oversight that this channel cannot replicate. Shadow work as a practice can be a meaningful complement to therapy. It is not a substitute. Shadow work is not about embracing darkness as an identity. The goal is not to perform your shadow or to justify difficult behavior by calling it authentic. The goal is integration, meaning the shadow material becomes known and workable, not celebrated and unexamined. Shadow work is not a one-time event. There is no single session or single insight that completes the process. Individuation is lifelong, not because something is wrong with you, but because the psyche is deep and there is always more to understand. This session is for educational and reflective purposes only. and is not a substitute for professional mental health support. If you are navigating serious mental health challenges, please seek qualified professional support alongside any self-inquiry practice. If you want to begin working with this material directly, there are 3 practical entry points. The first is projection work. When someone provokes a strong reaction in you, rather than moving straight to judgment or distance, get curious. Ask what quality this reaction might be activating in you, not as a verdict, but as an honest question. The second is trigger inquiry. When an emotional response feels bigger than the situation warrants, treat it as information rather than noise. Ask what earlier wound or earlier environment this moment reminds you of. The disproportionality is the signal, not the problem. The third is a shadow journal, a dedicated space where you write honestly about the parts of yourself you would rather not admit to, the qualities you suppress, the desires you do not say out loud, the reactions you later explain away, written without audience and without apology. Each of these practices builds the same capacity, the capacity to be with your own interior without flinching, without immediately reaching for a more comfortable story. That capacity is what shadow work actually develops, and it changes everything downstream. Shadow work is one of the most honest forms of self-inquiry available to us. It asks us to stop outsourcing our inner life to other people's expectations of who we should be. It asks us to look at what is actually there. What brought you to this idea? Leave it in the comments. Was it a pattern you cannot break? A relationship that keeps going wrong in the same way? A general feeling that something is running in the background you cannot quite name? Those are not coincidences. Those are the shadow doing what it does. If this video gave you something useful, hitting the like button will help someone else find it at the moment they need it. Subscribing means a guided session is here every Monday and Thursday. Our next video moves from understanding to doing. It is a full guided session, and it will show you exactly what this looks like in practice. If this session helped you process something difficult, our sleep meditation channel can help you rest from it. Link in description. The most important thing is not that you understood shadow work today. It is that something in you recognized it. Until next time, keep going gently.